This is the world's first Snapdragon 870 powered smartphone. This is the first flagship killer of 2021 and may very well land up being the phone to beat. This is the Motorola Edge S. The Snapdragon 870 might not have all the extra bells and whistles the 888 has, but it's a hell of a performer with a max clock speed of 3.19 GHz, the highest we've ever seen in a phone to date. Think of this as a Snapdragon 865 Plus, since it runs on the same 7nm plus architecture of yesteryear, but with a higher single core clock speed, new name, and much cheaper price, which the Edge S showcases perfectly by starting at just €249. Let's go ahead and unwrap this guy. I've never seen a case pre-installed on a phone in a box before. Motorola have been the first to do it in my eyes. We have this emerald glaze color variant here. You also get an emerald light, a silvery white finish, but this looks absolutely spectacular. It's kind of like a blue smashing into a purple glaze of the phone. We have a 5000 mAh battery, 20 watt wide charging, no wireless charging, IP52 certification, and we do have 5G, though just sub 6, and of course Wi-Fi 6 and NFC. We have Gorilla Glass 5 on the front. We have non-conductive vacuum metallization on the back, which does pick up a hell of a lot of fingerprints, and I think it's a plastic frame. I'm not too sure. It feels pretty aluminum to me. Nevertheless, let's stick with plastic for now. We do have that case in the box in case you are wary of those crazy fingerprints. You're going to get smudged all over the back of your brand new Motorola device. We do have a physical fingerprint sensor on the right hand side, as well as a non-split volume rocker. There's a special key over here we'll get to a little bit later, and we do have dual SIM, and we have one SIM that can be replaced by micro SDXC slots all the way up to a terabyte. That's absolutely mental. We have a headphone jack as well as USB Type-C, and unfortunately no dual stereo setup here since it doesn't utilize the top earpiece. That camera bump is pretty minimal when comparing it to other flagship smartphones around. You don't really notice it much at all compared to the other flagships around, and when it is on a flat surface, it doesn't have much wobble on that surface, so I guess that's a bit of a bonus. Looking at the actual design of all these devices here, you can clearly see the Motorola is a bit on the cheaper side, but I must say it's not doing a bad job trying to keep up with these guys at such a low price point. The back looks absolutely phenomenal, but what about that display? Well, we get introduced to a 21:9 aspect ratio, 6.7-inch double hole punch display. It is Full HD Plus with 409 ppi. It is unfortunately IPS LCD, no OLED over here, but we do have a pretty high brightness of 560 nits, and we do have a wonderful 90 Hz refresh rate, which is pretty great once again at this price point. It might not look as striking as other AMOLED or OLED panels out there, but it still looks pretty great. It's definitely a higher grade IPS LCD panel. Its color accuracy is pretty on par thanks to DCI-P3 color gamut rating, so it does kind of mesh in nicely with these other phones, though when you jump into white balance you definitely notice it, and there is some edge bleeding within each corner of the device as well as around those little camera holes at the top left, but when you bring it close up, the bleed is not as heavy as you saw further away. You can't notice it too much other than the screen protector being slightly off center there. We don't have WQHD Plus like we see in flagships from Xiaomi and Samsung, though we do have a high refresh rate panel. It's not 120 Hz like you've seen in many other flagship phones releasing this year or last year, though it doesn't really feel any different to me. If you ask me from a day-to-day basis, just running through the phone, doing regular things, 90 Hz for me is the sweet spot. I don't think you need anything more than that, but 120 Hz I guess is nice, but in this case you will be paying for that, so rather save some extra cash and get a more than fluid display. We also have an auto mode which can switch between 60 and 90 for better battery life, but you already have a massive 5000 mAh battery. You can hide your notch or make it like a Google Pixel or make it like a Xiaomi. We have natural, boosted and saturated colors. That's pretty much it, and we do have dark mode, though it's not always very black. This is an LCD panel, so it's not really going to save battery the way it would when you're using dark mode on an AMOLED panel. And talking about AMOLED panel, we don't have an always on display since it is an IPS display, but we do have something called peak display, which is pretty much an ambient display. You tap it and then you get to see the time, and it gives you like a little glowing feature. You can swipe up from there and then it shows you this wonderful screen. Also not AMOLED, so we can't have a fingerprint reader underneath the display, though the physical one, very similar to the Sony Xperia 1 Mark IIs, is very, very good. And in terms of speed, I actually think it's a lot faster than the Sony's. It's actually quicker than some of the optical readers underneath the display of some of these other flagship phones, which cost more than twice the price. A lot quicker than the Xiaomi over there. The Samsung's Ultrasonic Generation 2, of course, is just blitz fast at the moment. We'll have to see what happens with that one going forward. We also have unsecure face unlock using the main selfie cam over here. The rest of the phones that you're seeing here also have unsecure face unlock. It doesn't do a bad job. It's not the quickest that I've seen. I'm not quite sure which camera it's using. It would actually make sense for it to use ultra wide so it can try find your face in a wider angle. In my opinion, that's what they should be doing, but I think it's still using the main one since my face really has to be in the frame in order for it to be recognized. We also have something else that we can do with that selfie cam though. We have a heart rate sensor. Comparing it to the heart rate on my Galaxy Watch Active 2, it is 100% accurate with 71 beats per minute. Absolutely phenomenal. Moving on to the actual selfie cams here, we have a 16 megapixel main and an 8 megapixel ultra wide, which is the same as the Moto G Plus. And we do have pixel binning options for the selfie cam. Here's the main shot. Doesn't look the best if you ask me. I guess the lighting in this situation is a bit harsh. Here's the bin shot over here. And here is the ultra wide with 100 degrees field of view. Now let's move into some selfie video. This is TechNeck recording a 1080p 30 fps video on the brand new Motorola Edge S. Let me know what you guys think of the audio and the video quality when using the selfie cams to record video on the Moto Edge S. We've also got ultra wide using another selfie cam, which is absolutely phenomenal. Let me know what you guys think of this. I think it looks really, really good. I wish this was on every phone, honestly. This is dual video ultra wide. How epic is that? The main camera is a 64 megapixel OmniVision OV64B, the same sensor that we've seen in the Oppo Reno 5 Pro. We have a 16 megapixel ultra wide sensor here, as well as a 2 megapixel depth and a 3D TOF lens. As written on the back of the camera module, we do have a function called audio zoom, which does pretty much as it's named. As you can see, we have two options here. We have 64 binned down to 16, or we have 44 binned down to 11. Never seen that before. The ultra wide looked pretty great. 64 looks decent. The 16 megapixel binned looks pretty fantastic. Here is the 11 megapixel, I guess, binned, but you can't actually take 44 megapixel shots. Going into zoom 2 times, 5 times, they don't look too bad. Okay, I think they look pretty terrible. Let's get this out the way. This is not a camera phone, but close up and personal in this portrait effect actually looks pretty flagship material. Like, here's another portrait shot of little Harry Potter over here, and I think it does a pretty great job, especially in terms of edge detection. Getting up close and personal, we don't have a macro sensor, but we do utilize the ultra wide sensor. Doesn't do a terrible job, especially when you get back to my little figurine here. It does actually a better job than many other standalone macro sensors I've seen. Take a look at this camera interface. It looks absolutely fantastic. It is so simple. I wish more smartphones looked this way. We do have 6K 30 FPS option, which is great. No 8K over here, but I think it's still pretty good for those enthusiasts that want a higher resolution video recording. It's not the most stable. It's a bit jittery. It's not too bad. We have 4K 60 FPS, which is a lot more fluid, a lot more colorful, a lot more bright, because the Snapdragon 870 can definitely power this resolution a lot easier than 6K 1080p, the easiest to render for the chipset. It does a great job at 60 FPS, nice and smooth. Everything looks pretty good. I'm happy with that. And we also have ultra wide, of course. Ultra wide is unfortunately capped at 1080p and 30 frames per second. This is the max you can do for ultra wide, which is kind of disappointing when many phones are hitting 60 FPS and even all the way up to 4K. Here's 4K 60 FPS with stabilization mode off. And then when we throw it on, it is quite a bit better in terms of stabilization, but you're losing a lot of quality in detail and in color. We do have a portrait video mode, but unfortunately capped at 1080p 30 FPS. And when testing out focus, does a much better job than other phones I've tested out on the channel. Of course, in order to do all of this, we need to power up our phone in terms of charging. We do have optimized charging, which is great. It pretty much only finishes off your phone the last 20% of juice right before you wake up. And we also have overcharge protection, which caps your phone at 80%. And in this case, that will be 4000 milliamps. So it will charge faster and preserve your battery over time. We do have My UI skinned over Android 11 over here. It's pretty much stock. And with this new AI performance mode, it feels so darn snappy. I cannot get over how silky smooth this phone feels. And of course, we have Google rooted into the settings. Motorola was previously owned by Google, for those of you who don't know, and was sold to Lenovo not too long ago. Lenovo is the parent company at the current moment, and they're doing a great job in terms of hardware and software. Hopefully, they're off to a better start this year in 2021. The software features are great. Like I said, pretty much stock Android with a bunch of extra features, and they do a good job, and they're actually really useful, such as this one where you can change your theme, but in doing so, you can then select your font as well as the shape of your icons, so on and so forth, colors, and it's just all in one spot for you to make use of straight away. We also have this weather over here, this kind of weather animation that shows on the clock when you unlock your phone. It's little things like that that just put a smile on your face. Unfortunately, split screen is not the best, though we do have shortcuts when you double tap the power key or the fingerprint sensor. It works pretty great. Here is the key on the left that I spoke about at the start of the video. This is called My Key. What My Key can do is can open up any app of your choice, which is really awesome for those of you who just want to tap into something, maybe show your health code because of COVID, or jump into WhatsApp, WeChat, Facebook, Spotify, and it opens just as quick, or if not quicker, than opening the app itself. We have shortcuts within apps themselves. And if the best haptics on a mid-range phone were to have a baby with the best haptics on a flagship phone, they would probably call it a Motorola Edge S. Now let's go ahead and compare the audio of this single firing speaker to another phone with a single speaker and one with a dual speaker setup.
Have been getting too close to the city recently. Hell yeah!
And talking about sound, we have something called multi-volume, which is pretty much like Windows volume mixer. For any of you who know about that, you can pretty much adjust the volume of each individual app that you're running. When you come back into it, will be saved as that. We also have Moto Game Time and an in-game toolkit, which pretty much lets you screen record at 1080p 60 FPS, which is absolutely fantastic, as well as bring in a shortcut menu so that you can toggle between different things such as PIP, picture-in-picture mode, as well as record yourself while you're recording the screen, which you only really see on gaming phones. And we also have something called acoustic light, which jumps lights around your screen in accordance to the audio. Now, at the heart of the Motorola Edge S sits the Snapdragon 870 chipset, which is supposedly 11% faster than the Snapdragon 865. Now, if we take the Mi 10 Ultra on the left-hand side, which has a vanilla 865, the Note 20 Ultra on the right-hand side, which has the 865 Plus, the Motorola in the middle, which has an 870, they all read Snapdragon 865 on CPU-Z. But take note of their clock speeds, since we have 2.84 GHz on the vanilla one on the Xiaomi, 3.09 GHz max core clock speed on the Note 20 Ultra, and 3.19 GHz core clock speed on the Motorola Edge S. I mean, if you look at it from single core power, even the latest Snapdragon 888 powered smartphones are sitting at 2.84 GHz, making the 870 even quicker than that. But what does that mean for gaming? Well, let's start with Genshin Impact over here with all settings set to the absolute max. Our frames per second counter is working this time around using Geekbench Pro, and we're getting, I guess you could say, between 40 and 60 FPS most of the time. With the max settings on Genshin Impact, any device struggles. Anyone who plays the game will know that. And I think the Snapdragon 870 is doing a great job. I must say, the screen actually looks fantastic for an IPS LCD screen, at least what my camera is picking up, and in reality, I have to say the same. It really does a great job. It's super fluid with 180 Hz touch sampling rate, and I mean, if you're any good at the game, you shouldn't be dying like I am right now. The Motorola Edge S got a 55 frames per second average when running Genshin Impact for 7.5 minutes. Moving on to PUBG Mobile, unfortunately we don't have a 90 FPS option for this chipset yet. Hopefully that comes in the near future. So for right now we're going to be rocking HDR graphics and extreme FPS. That pretty much means that instead of PUBG Mobile being capped at 90 FPS, it's going to be capped at 60. But even when you do have the 90 FPS option, it is only available when you're playing with the absolute worst graphics settings. As of right now, it's doing a great job, solid 60 all the time across the board there, so that's great. I'm happy with that. Ultra high graphics and max FPS on Dead Trigger 2, very demanding game here. We're sitting at 90 FPS. That really makes me happy since many Snapdragon 888 powered smartphones haven't been accepted in terms of these games. The developers haven't really jumped ship. Real Racing 3 90 FPS once more, which is just fantastic. This is honestly a monster in terms of gaming. But what about benchmarks? Well, we're going to do something a bit different this time around, very similar to my last review. We're going to check the battery drain as well as the temperature in degrees Celsius. We're then going to jump through AnTuTu version 8.5.4, Geekbench version 5.3.2, and then 3D Mark Wildlife. And at the end, we're going to check back on the battery consumption as well as the degrees in Celsius, which is right now, and then get to the scores. So the Edge S drained by 20 milliamp hours per minute, making it the most efficient device against the iQOO 7, X60 Pro Plus, Mi 11, and S21 Ultra, all rocking Snapdragon 888 chipsets, and its temperature gain was 15.8 degrees in Celsius, putting it in between those four devices. Final score for AnTuTu, it sits well above the vanilla Snapdragon 865 and even the 865 Plus, and the Snapdragon 888 is slightly higher than it, but it doesn't really justify the price in terms of performance that you're getting. When it comes to single core and multi-core in Geekbench, the Motorola Edge S got 982 points and 3057 points respectively, once again higher than the 865 Plus and 865, but only in single core. In terms of 3D Mark Wildlife, our score was just shy of 5,000 points, which is only 600 shy of the Snapdragon 888, with FPS at 29.7 frames per second on average compared to the Snapdragon 888's 33.8. The Motorola Edge S might lack flagship features such as wireless charging, stereo speakers, an OLED display, a premium camera sensor, and a telephoto camera, but it does have a headphone jack, expandable storage up to 1 terabyte, a 5000 mAh battery, a snappy physical fingerprint sensor, near stock Android software with some more than desirable extra features, a bright and colorful high-grade LCD display with a silky smooth 90Hz refresh rate, which when paired with the powerful Snapdragon 870 chipset, 8GB of LPDDR5 RAM, and UFS 3.1 storage, crushes any game you throw at it. This device is an obvious choice for consumers that still want incredible performance but don't have to have the very best handsets around and would rather save some money, making the Motorola Edge S the phone to beat in the flagship killer segment of 2021.